You're listening to the Divorce and Your Money Show, the #1 divorce podcast in the United States. I'm your host, Sean Lehman, MBA and certified divorce financial analyst. Be sure to get a copy of my new book called, surprise, surprise, Divorce and Your Money, How to Avoid Costly Divorce Mistakes. You can get a copy on Amazon or by visiting divorceandyourmoney.com. While you're on the website, be sure to book a strategy session with me. We have 30-minute strategy sessions, and you have two options. One in which where you can just speak directly about issues that apply to you, regardless of whether you're at the beginning of the divorce, thinking about what you want to do, in the middle, trying to figure out the right path to take, or at the end of your divorce and you're trying to figure out the best options for you. And also there we have a document review appointment where we can review your financial affidavit, your divorce settlement, or other documents related to your divorce, and also include a strategy session on top of that to make sure that whatever you're preparing or about to sign is in your best interest. With that, on to this week's episode. In this episode, continuing the series on spousal support / alimony, whatever name you want to call it. And the importance of this episode is we're going to cover the different types of spousal support or alimony there are. I'm going to go through 5 different types: temporary support, permanent support, rehabilitative support, lump sum, and partial lump sum support. So let's jump in. Let's start with temporary support. Temporary support, generally speaking, is when before or during the divorce process, you have a temporary support amount you may be paying or receiving. It's the support you agree upon before the divorce is over. And pretty clear, the important thing to know about temporary agreements, and I say this almost every day on calls or when people are negotiating, whether you're the person about to pay or receive temporary spousal support, be very careful on what you decide. The numbers that you agree upon for temporary support often become the support numbers you use for after divorce. And so if you agree to $1,000 a month, oftentimes the agreement after the divorce will be $1,000 a month. Generally speaking, once you agree upon a temporary support number, that often becomes the final support amount that you use after the divorce process. So something to be very careful about there. Permanent support. Permanent support is what it sounds like. Permanent support is support for life. And it's generally speaking not as common as it used to be. If you're in a long-term marriage and you didn't work and you're near retirement age, there may be a permanent support amount. But if you are relatively young, then there usually isn't usually isn't permanent support. It's not something that's automatic or even expected the way it once used to be. That said, it still exists, and that's something that you should be aware of. And every state, of course, as always, has its own circumstances in revolving permanent support. Now, there's something between temporary and permanent support that wasn't on my list that I want to jump in, is there's just what your final support amount is. So it's just what you negotiate. It doesn't necessarily have a fancy name other than your alimony number. So if your alimony is $1,000 a month for 8 years, either paying or receiving, that's just the amount. That's not temporary, that's not permanent, that's just your amount. So that is the alimony payment. Just want to make that distinction in there very quickly. There's something called rehabilitative support, and it's not always known by that name, but I'm going to go through what it means because its meaning is very relevant to many of the discussions that I have and that you may be thinking about when it comes to thinking about support and what makes sense. So rehabilitative support is a very simple concept, and that is either you or your spouse may need some additional training to get back on their feet and start earning a reasonable living after the divorce process. If they've been out of the workforce for a period of time, or if you've been out of the workforce for a period of time, it might take 1 to 5 years to get back on your feet, or for your spouse to get back on their feet. And so in a rehabilitative support model, what often happens is you pay a higher amount of spousal support or receive a higher amount of spousal support for the first few years while that spouse gets their training. So if they're going to become a paralegal, go back to college, get an advanced degree, some sort of retraining, whatever the case may be, well, you might say, well, I'm going to agree to a higher level of support for the first 3 years. That person gets to get back on their feet. And then it's presumed that after those 3 years, they'll have their certification and then can earn a good living for themselves. And the support amount declines or goes away or whatever it is that you negotiate. That's what's called rehabilitative support. And it's just there to allow someone to retrain and then start earning funds on their own. So that's something to think about when it comes to support models. The last two are lump sum and partial lump sum support. You'll understand lump sum very clearly. A lump sum is paying all the support in one payment instead of paying it over time, or receiving all of your support in one payment instead of receiving it over time. It's a topic I've discussed on the podcast before. If you haven't gotten the archives with all of the podcast episodes, I encourage you to do that. There are some extensive details on how lump sum support can work and ways to negotiate it in that archive of all of the 200 plus podcast episodes, not all of which are public here. But what's important about the lump sum support is, let's just say, and I like to use simple numbers, you're going to be paying $1,000 a month for 5 years, which means you are going to be paying $12,000 a year or $60,000 over 5 years. $1,000 a month is what it is. Well, the option is, instead of paying $60,000 over 5 years, what if you just wrote a check for $60,000 and you're done paying support? There is no future support. You're separated from your spouse. You don't have to deal with at least that part of your relationship ever again. Now, conversely, maybe you're on the receiving end. So you're supposed to get $1,000 a month for 5 years. So you're supposed to receive $60,000 over 5 years. Well, maybe you might say, and I'm going to add a wrinkle into this example, you might say, I want all the money up front because I don't trust my spouse, or I don't want to have to deal with waiting for that monthly $1,000 every month. And I want my money now. So you might say, well, just write me a check for $60,000. But maybe, I don't want to say better yet, but maybe for the sake of negotiation, you're willing to take $55,000 up front or $50,000 up front instead of $60,000 over 5 years. Something that you may want to think about. And so that would be a lump sum. And so you get all your money up front. You might not get the full value, but you get all the money today instead of, or the day your settlement is over, or you come to a settlement rather. You get all the money in one fell swoop rather than waiting every month for that direct deposit or check to come in the mail. Now, the partial lump sum is also very simple, and that is, it's not always financially feasible for people to pay all their support or alimony in a lump sum amount. It just isn't. And sometimes circumstances just won't allow that to happen. And so what you can do in that situation is you can have what is a partial lump sum. So let's just say maybe you pay or receive 3 years up front and then you get the rest over time. Or you pay 3 years up front or 2 years up front and pay the rest over time. The plus side is you get a chunk of change in the short term if you're on the receiving end. The downside is your monthly payments are going to be lower going forward. But that's not really a downside mathematically. It's just a different way to negotiate the agreement. So that's something to think about. And sometimes that works too, where you give someone some, and if you're the one paying it, you give someone, your ex-spouse, some starter money, and then they get to do that. And then in the long run, your payments to them on a monthly basis are much lower. So something to think about. The reason that a partial lump sum comes into play is that it's just another tool to have in your toolbox. Is it may not always be either or. Sometimes you just can't write a check for a large support amount without, it just might not be feasible. So that's why you might do a partial lump sum. So something to think about there. So there's, as I said, different types of spousal support to consider. There is the temporary support, permanent support. I interjected with just what we call support. which is your final agreement, rehabilitative support or more money in the short run for retraining, lump sum support, and then, of course, a partial lump sum. A lot of different options to think about when you are negotiating a potential spousal support agreement, and different options really can apply really well I should say, different circumstances. And so you should think about what options may make the most sense for you and your circumstance, because it's not always set in stone. There's a lot of ability for some creativity when negotiating support agreements, and that creativity can help you actually get this divorce done rather than extending the process out even further because you're having a hard time coming to the right of support agreements and what is financially feasible and acceptable for all parties involved. Now, before you go, I want to make sure you get some really important information. I'm going to tell you about a few things that may be of interest to you. First, as a favor, is if you could leave a review. If you're on the iTunes store, leave a review on iTunes, or if you search Divorce and Your Money on a website called Trustpilot or on Google, you can leave a review there. It's quick, it's anonymous, it only takes a few seconds, and I really, really appreciate your feedback. I have lots of reviews on iTunes and on Trustpilot, and I appreciate hearing your stories. Also, on divorceandyourmoney.com, you can get lots of great information. Of course, you can book a 30-minute strategy session directly with me. There's two types of strategy calls you can book. Just a normal strategy session, which we discuss the questions that are most pressing to you, regardless of where you are in the divorce process, be at the beginning, towards the end, or in the middle. Doesn't really matter. There's lots of great information we can cover during that strategy call. And also, we have a document review call. It's been one of the biggest things that we've done over the past year, which is you can send me your documents, be it your financial affidavit, a settlement agreement, or other documents that you would like for me to review. And then I review those in advance of the call, and then we get to discuss them in depth as part of a strategy session and get specific answers to some of the specific documents and things that you are considering. Also, for those who need ongoing support, we do have a few options for ongoing support, but regardless, it all starts with a coaching call that you can book at divorceandyourmoney.com. Don't forget to also get a copy of my new book. It's called Divorce and Your Money: How to Avoid Costly Divorce Mistakes. It's available on my website or also on Amazon. You just look me up and make sure you get the new edition. It is filled with excellent information regarding the divorce process, and I know that you will find it helpful. And once you've read the book, be sure to leave a review. That really helps me. I appreciate your feedback, and it also helps other people as they try and find this information. And finally, last but not least by any means, is on the store at divorceandyourmoney.com. If you click on the store button, you can get access to the full archive of podcast episodes. There's over 200 episodes, and what's great about the store link is that the episodes are organized in neat buckets. And they're organized by topic, so it's very easy to follow along with the information. And it is easy to pick out the key topics that matter most to you. And you can get all of those podcast episodes in the store. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Sean Lehman, MBA and Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. Take care.